Hello, my name is Kevin Foley. This is my report for my Composition 2 class, my midterm report. I'm doing my report on why college athletes should be paid. First of all, I'm a Jacksonville firefighter. I have a wife and two children. We live in St. Augustine. The reason I chose this topic is because I like sports, like a lot of people. I'm a big New York Yankees fan, being from New York originally. Also like the Jets. Also like college sports a lot, watch it a ton. I really like most people, I like the NCAA basketball tournament. I like the college football playoffs and just college sports in general. You know, I like just like everything, like everybody likes. The reason I chose this topic is because often you find you're watching a sport and you see, I mean, you enjoy the sport, it's awesome, something cool happens, you get excited, it's great and stuff like that, but you don't really realize how much money is being made off of these sports. I'm not sure people really care either because they just want to be entertained, but when you actually look into it, it's like, it's crazy how much some of these sports are generating for these schools. And I thought it was interesting to see like where the money was going, really. If they're not going towards college athletes, you know, what are these schools doing with all this money? What is the NCAA doing with all this money? There's just something I thought was interesting. There's a show on HBO. There's a host called John. His name's John Oliver. He does a show called Last Week Tonight on HBO, and he talks about all kinds of stuff. He's actually kind of, I guess, kind of comedian slash political personality, kind of, but he's pretty funny. But the stuff he talks about is pretty real. I like it. It's interesting. So he's talking about the NCAA on this one night. And talking about March Madness in particular. March Madness is what they call the NCAA basketball tournament. It's a nickname for it. And just talking about the amount of money that that particular tournament generates revenue-wise. So he starts off and he's talking about, and I have a bunch of things from that show that I want to talk about. So he starts off talking about the sponsors that are, you can just tell by watching the show that you don't really think about, but you see sponsors and stuff like Coca-Cola, AT&T, all the big ones, but then they start sponsoring, they're sponsors for little things like the basketball, like drinks that the players are drinking, like the ladder is sponsored. Warner Ladders is the sponsor of the ladder that people climb up to cut down the nets when they win the big game. You know, like when you see somebody cutting down a net, they have to climb a ladder to get up there to cut down the net. That ladder is sponsored. I mean, it's ridiculous how much, you know, how many people are sponsoring it. They're getting money from anywhere they can get money from. There's also, when I'm talking about college athletes not getting paid, there's a little snippet on, there's a player, his name's Shabazz Napier. He's a basketball player, he plays professionally now, but he was playing for University of Connecticut back then. And they show him and he's talking about basically his living conditions in college and how there were nights where he would go hungry because he didn't have the money to pay for food, basically. And these are high-profile, big-time athletes. A guy who's going to go professional, probably knew he was going to go professional, but can't afford to eat. You know, I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. Also talks about the education that players are getting. The NCAA, the president of the NCAA, his name's Mark Emmert. He has a big policy that, like most of the people that aren't students, their policy is basically the students that go to college, they're not employees, so they shouldn't get money to go. They're there for the education, and that's it, and that's great and all. But a lot of times, like they say on that show, the education that these players are getting, and this isn't all of them, but a lot of them, the education that they're getting are really watered down education. So by the time they do get the degree, if they even get the degree, it's a degree that really a lot of people can't do anything with. So they're just there so that they can play sports, and they have to go to some kind of class, and that's what they do. They get them into a class that maybe they can get through it. They get into a class that they know they can get through just so they can play sports, basically. And then they can say, this was their, this is basically what they're here for, is to get their education, which is great and all, but I'm not sure it's all the time true. There's also a part in that show where he's talking about, there's a player named Ed O'Banion, and he was a former UCLA basketball player, and he had a lawsuit recently. It had to do with his likeness being in a college basketball game for like PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, and he's basically saying, if you've ever played one of these games, especially a college game or a professional game either, but if you've ever played one of these games, you'll notice that the players look just like the actual players, like not just in the face, but they're the same height, they wear the same number, they're the same complexion, if the player talks, it sounds just like them. I mean, it's all the way, like basically, that's the person, that's what they're going for. And they're not getting paid for that in any way because they're college athletes. So I guess they're being taken advantage of. The NCAA says that colleges don't make much of a profit as far as the money being generated. That colleges aren't getting in all that money that everybody thinks they're getting. But reports will show, and on that show they show it, that schools will make a lot of money, but they spend it. If you look at some of the places, some of the colleges, and some of these facilities that they're building, they're real extravagant. That money's not coming from nowhere, it's got to come from somewhere. So they spend a lot of that money. So at the end, it's one of those situations where if you get a lot of money, like the government, you get a lot of money from the government, you're a government-sponsored organization, and government gives you money, you want to spend that. Like fiscal year kind of deal, you want to spend as much as you can, because the next year if you don't spend it, they're going to say, hey, you didn't spend it, we're not going to give you as much. So the colleges make sure that they spend all that money so that, they don't have to come up with excuses for why they're spending it, It shows off the University of Alabama's sports facility, just for example, and it's very extravagant. If you ever get to watch that video, it almost looks like a resort. There's spas, there's all kinds of stuff, and it is for the athletes, but it's also so that when they bring high school athletes in and people who want to come to that school, they can show them that facility and say, how awesome is University of Alabama's facility? All that money that's made to build those facilities is coming from somewhere. It also talks about the University of Alabama's head football coach. His name's Nick Saban, and he makes roughly $7 million a year to be the head football coach at Alabama, which is a big job, but I'm not sure it's $7 million, a year, big job. Coaches make money not just from, that is a lot of money, and I mean, no one will say anything about that, but coaches also make money from endorsement deals. Coaches make money from radio shows. I mean, a lot of coaches have shoe contracts, just because that's a way for them to make money. Obviously, everybody wants to make money. It's the players who are getting kind of hosed on the whole deal. I used several sponsors. That's one of them. Some of the sources, not sponsors, sources that I used are from ESPN. Michael Wilbon is a columnist, but he also has a show called Mike and Mike on ESPN that I watch sometimes. He did a article called College Athletes Deserve to Be Paid. It's pretty good. It's got a lot of good stuff on it. Also, Jay Billis, he's a analyst on TV. He was also a Duke basketball player. He's got an article. It's really good. First Take on ESPN. It's hosted by Jay Billis, who's a columnist, and also Stephen A. Smith, who's a columnist. They talk about, college athletes sometimes will get in trouble. They're not allowed to take any money from anybody. Sometimes they'll get in trouble for taking money from whoever, from agents, from boosters at the school, and the guys on First Take say that they believe that college athletes should take money from wherever they can get it. They deserve it, they should take it. So talking about taking money under the table, signing bonuses for going to the school, I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, really, maybe over the top stuff, but they make a good point. Joe Nocera is a sports columnist at the New York Times, and he talks about, he has an article called Way to Start Paying College Athletes. and he talks about a salary cap type idea, almost like they have in pros, where the schools would have a certain amount of money that they could pay all college athletes, kind of a total amount that they could divvy out to certain college athletes, and that's how they would pay students. So it's an example of a way they could do it. Mark Edelman, he writes for the U.S. News and World News, has a article for the case for paying college athletes, and this has basically a bunch of statistics that I really liked. I thought were really really informative. One of them is college sports generates $11 billion annually. $11 billion annually. Like every year they make $11 billion. That's a lot of money. No one, I mean, that's a crazy amount of money. Also that 50 colleges report that they have exceeded $50 million every year. That's how much they make off college sports. Over $50 million a year. 50 colleges. And it says there's 5 schools that make over $100 million. I mean, $100 million for just sports. The NCAA, I mean, when I said that the NCAA and these championships that they have, especially football and basketball, where there's a lot of money being made, for example, the college playoff, the football playoff makes a ton of money. I mean, but in this report it actually says that the NCAA basketball tournament in 2011 sold the broadcast rights for like $770 million. I mean, just for that year, $770 million. I mean, that is a ridiculous amount of money, and you just have to wonder where all that money is going. Like they say that it's divvied out and it's for education purposes. It goes towards schools for other programs and stuff like that. But I mean, these players are the ones that are making the money that make it possible. The highest. I thought this was the craziest part. The highest paid public employee in 40 out of 50 states in 2011 was the head football or head basketball coach at that state's university. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's a crazy number. So 40 out of 50 states that the head basketball coach or head football coach was the highest paid employee. Also it talks and says, how I was saying that NCAA, they divvy out that money throughout the organization or throughout colleges for education purposes. The president of the NCAA in 2011 made $1.7 million. The Mark Emmert that I was talking about earlier, $1.7 million that year. I mean, you look at some of these numbers, it's things you don't think about, but I mean, that's a crazy amount of money. As far as things that I'd still like to learn about, there are ideas that college athletes, well, I'd like to see college athletes paid in some form because I think they deserve it. There's also talk that, or an idea that should all college athletes be paid, whether they're in sports that generate a lot of money, should we pay like softball players the same amount of money as a football player, or soccer players, or swimming, or so I'd like to learn more about that. I'd also like to find more statistics on the subject as far as graphs and charts to see how much just students in general have at their disposal when they're in school. Do they make no money? Do they have some money to eat? Or I've read reports that seen things that they say that now college athletes are able to get food for free, so I'd like to learn more about that. So that's all stuff that I'd like to find out about. So this was my report. Hope you all liked it. That's it.